Well, hi people. I've taken the title for this video from another video that I'm going to provide a link to. It's called Power, Deception and the Church. It's possibly one of the most significant talks that I've heard of recent. The woman is speaking to the National Conference of the American Association of Christian Counselors. Some of the things she says is just stunning, especially in the light of all that is coming out about abuse in the church at the moment. Now, this talk was given last October, so way before all this started. I highly recommend it to those who are truly interested in being God's end time army. And if you're truly interested in that, then please stay to the end of what I have to say. Okay, so look, I am so over hearing people say, or in their videos or whatever it is, or having people tell me about the great and powerful and majestic callings that God has placed on their lives and how famous they're going to be, right? You know, they're going to look to heaven and say, I am the chosen one of God. Now, look, I agree that it's important to know and understand your calling and to educate yourself about your gifts. But so many want the glory, they want the destiny, and they're just simply not prepared to wait for the training to be finished. They're certainly not prepared to walk like Jesus walked. Anyway, some of you may be aware that I'm currently writing a book on holiness. It's slow going for several reasons, but it is a book that God has asked me to write. And I faltered doing it originally because I thought someone more qualified should be doing this. But I feel the main reason why I'm doing it is because I know that the church overwhelmingly does not understand what holiness is. As I peruse what even well-known theologians write on this subject, and even as I speak to Christians, and I hear what they say and the comments that they make on the subject, I realise the church is blind to the truth about holiness. Now, is that a wrong statement for me to make when we look at the overall condition of today's church? Would you say that is a false statement, that the church, is known by its holiness? I think the most revealing thing about all of this can be judged by the behaviour of the church, the way in which she responds to other human beings, for heaven's sake. Now, whether that be ways in which Christians respond to each other and the way they attack each other constantly, or the way in which Christians respond to their own family members, the angst that exists between Christians and their own family members. I want to tell you something. If your family members are not saved and you're in contention with them, that the holiness, the relationship, the source of reconciliation will not come through them. It comes through you. You think they're contending with you. You have the responsibility in that situation. God will give you that if you respond properly to him. Now, is it also seen in the way which Christians are responding to the secular world? There's nothing Christ-like in any of this. Yet holiness has its foundation in relationships. A stunningly large majority of the church, almost entirely all of the church, comes from the premise that to be holy, one has to keep all the laws of God, which are recorded in the Holy Scriptures. Because of this, they have then thrown out the doctrine of entire sanctification. They don't believe that a person can actually become totally morally holy, that is, entirely without sin. Yet, stunningly, they force this very premise on the unsaved. They expect the lost to walk in holiness. And you see the evidence for the church's position on this in every comment that uses the laws of God to inform someone else that they are failing God, where they are failing to live up to God's standards, where they are failing to be holy. We love to let other people know how they're failing to be holy. And of course, each one of us has our own prejudices in regards to God's laws, usually based on the fact that we ourselves aren't guilty of breaking that particular law of God. So in other words, if I'm not doing it and you are, I'm going to be telling you about it. So then they're quite happy to do things such as confronting homosexuals because they themselves aren't guilty of that particular sin. So they see themselves as holy and righteous and the keeper of God's laws. Their actions say, I am right and I'm going to heaven because, I'm holy and clean. And they will say to the sinner, well, you are wrong, you are unclean, and you're headed for hell. And I'm going to inform you of that. These are the ones that love to tell me I'm wrong. They'll say that homosexuals have an evil agenda. It's an evil agenda. It's an agenda. It's not an agenda. It's a stronghold. It's a principality. It is a curse. Now, what we need to establish is, where did that curse come from? Why is there a curse like this on our lands? Because it is generational. It's the sins of the fathers that have come down from the third and fourth generations. Stick that into your law book. This generation is suffering as victims under the curse that is generational. And it probably escalated with the sexual revolution of the 1960s, when society as a whole abdicated from the wholesome principles that God had laid out for us. And it's a curse that we have all contributed to. Now, I've had a lot of people challenge me about this on my channel and in the flesh, because I won't jump on the condemn homosexuals bandwagon. Christians telling me that I'm wrong about this. But here's the thing, and I want you to hear this. I am yet to come across one of these Christians who are not still yet a wounded person themselves. And so then what this all boils down for me, as I observe this going on, is that all I see is the walking wounded attacking the walking wounded and confronting other people about their sin when they're still walking in their own. Victims attack other victims, and they do it because, well, firstly, they're afraid of the power of evil. So they still don't really and truthfully believe that they can be victorious in God and that other people can be too. They don't really believe that God is going to fix all this mess. Secondly, they do it because they don't believe that evil is at work in them as well. Because they aren't doing that particular sin, then they see themselves as clean and holy and therefore the sword of justice. They're doing God a favor. This is not holiness. This is self-righteousness. This is the action of the Pharisees, the leaven of the Pharisees. And I think we think that sometimes because we're outside the church, we're outside the institution, we might be in the wilderness, we've grown in our understanding, and we're not the big people up there, we're the little people, but we've had this call on our life that God has given us to be the bride, or the 144,000, or the end times army, or whatever it is. I think we think that we're now safe, that we're now clean, that we're now righteous, we're now above all this other stuff that's coming out, like in the NAR and all this other stuff. We're not. We're only in process, right? The call has gone out to us, but we are only in process. We need to finish our wilderness before we start going around being a victim, attacking other victims. Now, if only the church had been crying out about its own sexual sin as loudly as it bellows against the sexual sins of the unsaved, maybe we would never have gotten into this place, because we're all in it. We're all in it. Even if we're not inside the institutional church, we are still a part of the ecclesia. And we have all contributed to the sin of God's people. Now, I wanted to make this video to help us understand that just because we aren't at the top of the echelon of the religious stratification, in other words, just because we aren't these leaders in God's church, doesn't mean that we aren't guilty of this same behaviour and will receive the same discipline. Some of us will respond to that discipline positively and some won't. Ezekiel told Israel that God was about to judge the nation, that everyone had contributed to the sin of Israel. And when God judged the people, he first removed his glory from the temple. Then judgment came, starting at the top and working its way all the way down to the last man. Every one of them, not one was saved from the judgment except those who sighed and cried over all the abominations that were done within it, that were done within Israel. God is preparing his bride right at this time, but she is going to be holy. The only reason she will become his bride is because she has made herself ready. They are not going to be like the harlot church. And there are many who are feeling this call to be the bride. But in what way are you different? Are you holy? Do you even believe that you can attain that? That you can become morally holy? Because if you don't even believe that, you're not even going to seek it. And you'll always be operating out of a fallen nature. And then who are you going to help? You'll just end up like these ones from the NAR, just under judgment. Finish your wilderness. Don't come out. Don't do whatever you think that you need to do. Don't go out being the sort of justice for God until you're finished your wilderness, because that's just hypocritical. Now, I'm going to leave you with a statement about holiness. It comes from my book. I coined this myself. I'm not going to explain what I mean by it. I just want to leave it with you to ponder. And it is this. We don't become holy by obeying all the laws of God. We obey all the laws of God by becoming holy.